Why, hello there. It's time to continue our story. Lay back, light a cigar, and ask your servant to give you a nice scalp rub. It's time to begin. Rhino Men, Birth of Rhino Men, Chapter 5. In the back room of the club, Rydian briefly laid down Cigarilli and the Rhino Man so that he could have a little think. Cigarilli was quiet, clinging just barely to life. The Rhino Man, now splayed across the lion-skin rug on the floor of Cigarilli's office, seemed to have stabilized and was breathing less laboriously. Even so, disposing of the Rhino Man seemed the right thing to do. After all, the thing was unnatural, violent, and seemed to have a murderous grudge against human beings. Plus, it was the shocking product of the love-infused sperm Rydian had intended for he and Danielle's own child. Yes, there were even greater depths to Rydian's loss. Ever since he left the forces, he'd been involved in too many forces to mention here easily, Rydian had dreamed of starting a family, a beautiful squadron of little portcullises. There would have been little Templeton Portcullis, firstborn son, a chip off the old block if ever one existed. They'd have thrown a few balls around when Rydian got home from hammering before he went out to do some arm wrestling, or hell, maybe Rydian would have packed it all in and become a stay-at-home father. Then they could have played ball morning, noon, and night, or even on afternoons. Then there'd have been little Rydian Portcullis Jr., a violent child, plagued from birth by a mysterious and unearned sadness, yet still loved deeply by his mother and father, and who could forget Rydian's third hypothetical child, Esmeralda Jules Sunshine Samantha Portcullis, the spitting image of Danielle. She would have been an author just like her mum, or maybe a lawyer or something like that. Rydian would have given her the option. But those days were not to be. Not after Rydian's natural strength and skills had become so valuable that certain crime lords had taken to cloning him, and splicing his DNA with Rhino to boot. Could he be certain this was the only clone? Why would a scientist hell-bent on creating the ultimate arm-wrestling beast go through all that trouble and only make one? Who in their right mind would shoulder the burden of developing the technology, gathering the raw organic materials for such a venture, and then producing this ridiculous thing if it were to be the only one? The massive creature stirred briefly, undiscerningly kicking around with its self-cauterized leg stumps like a dog in the throes of a nightmare in which the postman finally gets his revenge. That thing had killed dozens tonight, without any apparent motive. There had to be more to this.
Do you think there's more to this?
Asked Dragonhawk Zero, a step behind Rydian's naturally quick thought process, yet still on the right page.
Yes, I expect there is.
Replied Rydian.
I really do.
The elevator will take us to the street.
Mumbled Cigarilli through his still dying breaths.
If you still intend to save my life so that I can tell you where to go to seek your complete revenge, of course.
Yes, of course
Rydian froze mid-sentence. The stalwart impulse, his totally efficient mind-body network, had alerted him to the fact that the sound of screaming was cutting through the club music. Dragonhawk Zero stopped doing push-ups for a moment to listen too.
What now?
Asked Rydian rhetorically.
Watch these two.
He said to Dragonhawk Zero, referencing the Rhino Man and Cigarilli before striding with great purpose back onto the dance floor. It wasn't obvious that anything was wrong. Not 5 minutes shy of the Rhino Man's bloody rampage, and the majority of patrons had already resumed their hedonistic activities. Not surprising. It wasn't the first time an augmented humanoid specifically bred for armed combat had gone haywire at the old meat factory, and if Rydian had to bet, he would put $10,000 on it, not being the last time that happened either. But where had the screams come from? Then Rydian caught it. In a corner booth, he saw a woman. She was dressed to the nines, but the effect was spoiled by the fact that she was squatting on the table in the booth and screaming at the top of her lungs. Was that piss gushing from her lower region? No. Rydian's keen eyes could easily tell the difference between run-of-the-mill piss and amniotic fluid. That woman was giving birth right here and right now. He jumped over the crowds of people which stood in his way, mentally thanking Cigarilli for picking a building with such a high-ceilinged basement. Landing at the booth, he swiftly removed his still pristinely clean denim bandana, jacket, vest, and trousers, folded them and passed them to Chucky Choo Choo Bear Balboza for safekeeping behind the bar. He'd rather they didn't get covered in amniotic fluid, excrement, and the other detritus the woman would no doubt be secreting. Except for his cowboy boots, he now stood fully nude. His washboard stomach gleamed like a plastic He-Man doll in the colorful disco lights.
Where is your husband?
Asked Rydian after noticing her prominent wedding ring. He wouldn't have presumed she was married otherwise. People choose to live their lives in all sorts of ways. That's what his old sensei had taught him when he was training karate in Tokyo as a boy.
He died 11 months ago,
She said, clearly trying her best not to stare down at Rydian's genital gifts before screaming, "Ah!"
10 months ago, and it would have been possible for him to have impregnated you, but 11 months, tell me.
He continued, pulling on the rubber gloves and stethoscope he kept taped to his back at all times.
Have you made love to any other virile men since your husband's passing?
No, I would never dishonor his memory like that.
She said, struggling to keep her eyes forward and not down towards Rydian's big crotch.
Then my hunch was right.
Ridian took the woman by the hand.
This is some sort of immaculate conception. Don't worry, I'm going to get you through this.
He clapped his hands and the DJ immediately cut the music in the club. Everyone stood still as the house lights came on.
It's me again, Ridian Portcullis.
Spoke Ridian quietly, although the people in the club were so respectfully still that all were able to easily hear his authoritative murmurs.
Can all the ladies in the club raise their hands if they are unexpectedly giving birth?
Ridian continued, getting straight to the point. To his complete unsurprise, every single woman in the club raised their hands simultaneously.
Please remain calm. What we have here is an as-yet unexplained case of immaculate group conception. I would like to ask all gentlemen to help the ladies to the arm wrestling stage. Are there any doctors in the house?
I'm a doctor.
Said one doctor.
So am I.
Said another doctor.
Me too.
Called out a third doctor.
Great, that's a lot of doctors we have here.
Replied Ridian, pleased by the number of doctors. He wouldn't have to deliver 15 babies alone tonight.
I'm also a doctor.
Said a fourth doctor, zipping up his trousers as he emerged from the men's restroom.
Brilliant.
Said Ridian.
That makes it 4 doctors in total.
Some men helped escort the 13 women to the center of the club and onto the stage, while the rest of them moved some of the corpses from the Rhino Man's rampage from 5 minutes ago to the fringes of the basement to make it a bit more hygienic. Chucky Chick Magnet Balboza brought out a few pillows for the lasses and a few stiff drinks for the doctors. The 13 mothers-to-be were made as comfortable as possible as the doctors began their work, holding their hands, suggesting the ladies push, etc.
This isn't right.
Said one of the doctors 4 or 5 hours into the labors.
What is the problem, Doctor?
Asked Ridian.
This baby is crowning, but...
He paused, unable to finish his sentence due to complete shock. Ridian barged the doctor out of the way, sending him falling over backwards and breaking his back. Fortunately, another doctor appeared from the crowd to tend to him. Ridian started down at the woman's vulva. The doctor was correct. This wasn't right. Where a regular human baby's head should have been visible, there existed instead a baby Rhino Man's head, complete with tiny horn, flaring nostrils, and a miniature version of Ridian's own handsome eyes. Before he could consider what to do, the woman gave one last great push, sending the baby Rhino Man hurtling out of her vagina and into Ridian's great arms. Gray skin, a cute wrinkled face, and beautiful wet curly hair prevented Ridian from immediately terminating the ill-begotten child. He gazed into its eyes. It looked just like him, well, without the rhino snout, horn, and gray skin. The woman who had just given birth to this bizarre child immediately reached for him, bringing him close to her chest and naming him Bobby.
You can't keep him.
Ridian said.
He's too dangerous.
Ridian, we need to help the other ladies.
Shouted one of the doctors.
13 births are a lot to handle for just 3 doctors plus you, Ridian. Although I must say you have done the work of at least 3 doctors.
Can you imagine if there had been more women in the club tonight? I don't think we could have handled more births.
Chimed in another of the doctors.
Thank God tonight was a sausage fest.
Said Ridian. He then got to work delivering the other infants. 2 sets of twins were amongst the batch. All were boys. The new mothers all took great pleasure at meeting their sons, no matter how weird and muscular they were. The people who remained in the club watched Ridian with reverence as he performed one final C-section. After 12 hours, it was done.
I don't understand what we've seen here tonight.
Said one of the doctors. Ridian had a hunch which was undoubtedly correct. The Rhino Man's virility was so outrageous that those women had become pregnant through simple proximity, perhaps an unintended consequence of the cloning process. This scientist, Vivian something, sure had a lot to answer for. Ridian surveyed the new mothers, happily cooing with their abnormal offspring. If those rhino babies get out of this club, he knew what needed to be done.
Ridian, I just wanted to say that Cigarilli is almost dead, so you better come sort him out.
Said Dragonhawk Zero, popping his head out of the back room to see what was going on.
I said to watch them.
Said Ridian, realizing that Dragonhawk Zero had left the Rhino Man, the original adult one, alone in the back room with Cigarilli, who he needed alive.
They're still in here, it's fine.
Dragonhawk Zero couldn't finish his sentence before he was gored through his heart by a long, jagged horn, which erupted through his left pectoral muscle like a demonic meerkat popping out of its burrow. Chapter 6.
Dragonhawk!
Yelled Ridian in surprise. He began running towards his old buddy in what felt like slow motion as Dragonhawk Zero was lifted up towards the ceiling by the Rhino Man. Its cauterized leg stumps had flattened under its bombastic weight, creating for the beast 2 thick trunks upon which to walk. The beast let out a sickening wail as it lurched its ugly head from left to right, shaking Dragonhawk Zero violently this way and that. His torso was locked into place by the beast's cruel horn, yet he was able to swivel around on it in a way which must have really hurt his heart. Not one to go without a fight, Dragonhawk Zero began delivering a series of expert elbows to the Rhino Man's forehead and eyes. But despite the sounds of Dragonhawk Zero's elbows crunching and splintering against the Rhino's tank of a head, the monster barely flinched. Still feeling as if he were running in slow motion, Ridian jostled through the crowds as they tried to scramble towards the staircase. He needed to help his buddy, but each time he stepped to the left, he found himself blocked by somebody and would change direction. Then he'd find that someone else, in an attempt to make space for him, had moved to that position, and so on. It was terribly frustrating. Meanwhile, Dragonhawk was giving his all, having drawn his concealed scimitar. Riding the Rhino Man's foul head like a bucking bronco, he sliced and diced at the bastard Rhino Man's head while the beast's jerking movements caused his body weight to widen and stretch the hole in his own impaled chest. Blood gushed from the wound like a strawberry fountain. But still he battled on. Rydian now found himself stuck behind an old man on a mobility scooter. Apparently the battery had run out, so he swiveled quickly and pivoted, performing a somersault into splits to make his way under and around to a patch of empty floor he could make out just near the where Dragonhawk Zero was having his final battle. But as he was about to make his landing, a little girl with a balloon stepped into the spot he was going to land. It must have been bring your kid to work day for one of the crooked cops in attendance tonight, so Rydian pushed his chest out in front of him, buttressing the air in order to slow his velocity, making him land just shy of the girl, who smiled at him briefly before saying she wished she had a daddy just like him.
I've got to get to Dragonhawk Zero.
The Rhino Man was done with his grand entrance and was now ready to properly fuck Dragonhawk Zero up. It grabbed Dragonhawk Zero's arm and in one smooth motion ripped him away from the horn. This caused the horn to slice through Dragonhawk Zero's chest and ribcage, which looked really painful to Rydian. Holding Dragonhawk Zero up by his arm, the Rhino Man made to punch the now critically injured aspiring bounty hunter. But Dragonhawk Zero was quick, and dangling as he was from the Rhino Man's arm, ran up the beast's body and did a sweet backflip kick right into its face, and then, aided by his bloody body, was able to slip from the Rhino Man's clutches. The Rhino Man, unaffected by Dragonhawk Zero's kick, began to snort and stomp its tree trunk stumps. It was preparing to charge, but as it snorted, it picked up an unexpected scent. A flash of recognition struck its face. Rydian, who couldn't get around the queue of exiting clubgoers who'd been here partying for 15 or so hours, knew what the Rhino Man had picked up on.
Chucky!
He shouted, still feeling like he was stuck on slow motion.
Yeah, Rydian?
Chucky Chewbacca Balboza replied.
Get the women and babies out of here. They're going to amp him up.
It was too late. The Rhino Man had realized that he was surrounded by his own immaculate offspring, and Rydian could see in its stance and gait a newfound paternal strength.
Excuse me,
said Rydian to a group of people who were standing in his way. Steam began to rise from the Rhino Man as it continued to charge up its charge attack. The beast's veins began to pop from innies to outies.
Ancient Dragonhawk lords, hear me now.
Dragonhawk Zero shouted heroically, his heart dangling out of his chest hole as he prepared for his final attack.
Give me the hawk power I need to smoke this son of a bitch.
Dragonhawk!
Shouted Rydian without a hint of the desperation that any other man in this situation would have been emitting. He was now stuck in front of a man who continuously tried to move in whichever direction Rydian did in order to get out of his way, the two of them blocking each other in their politeness. A brief ray of light, like a lens flare, seemed to burst from Dragonhawk Zero's crystalline eyes. He had been granted the strength of his elders for this final strike. He immediately launched himself from the ground, his left leg outstretched like a jousting lance. Though brutally damaged, his body was still insanely beautiful, his peak human physique resembling a Michelangelo statue, including the tiny dick. As Rydian watched his Flying Hawk Elder strike unfold, he had to rub his eyes in disbelief. Dragonhawk Zero's entire body seemed to be wrapped in an effervescent green glow, which, upon further inspection, was actually 1 billion ancient ghost Elder Hawks hurtling around his body and carrying him forwards in an ultimate spirit-infused attack. Rydian glanced towards the Rhino Man, whose newfound paternal strength had now been fully integrated into its charged-up charge attack. The ground cracked as it began its one-beast stampede towards Dragonhawk Zero. Many of the bottlenecked men, women, and chimpanzees who were slowly but desperately being funneled out of the club via the single winding staircase were shaken to the ground as the beast lurched at great speed towards the now flaming heel of the Hawk Clan's final warrior.
Dragonhawk!
Yelled Rydian, finally getting clear of the man who was in his way and finding himself face to face with another man.
After you,
said the man, stepping to his left.
My thanks, brother,
said Rydian. And as Rydian made his way finally around the man who had just now been in his way, he witnessed the startling moment that the parentally powered Rhino Man's charged-up charge attack made contact with the Elder Hawk ancestry kick. At first, it was just the tip of the Rhino Man's horn, which violently caressed Dragonhawk Zero's foot. The sight was akin to that day in 1912 when the epic Level 99 iceberg made contact with the Titanic's unsinkable hull. At first, the billions of luminescent green ghostkin were able to provide some resistance to the Rhino Man's horn, swaths of Hawk Clan ancestors losing their afterlives to the genetically modified tip. If one were to zoom in to 100x magnification, which Rydian now did with his long-range microscope he kept for such occasions, you would see a battlefield of green Hawk Clan heroes working tirelessly to buttress the Rhino Man's horn. Rydian was almost a little bit surprised to watch the many generations of mighty yet tiny ghost warriors be so instantly torn apart by the Rhino Man. It was like watching Mike Tyson fighting a never-ending stream of ants. Even if he did eventually tire, it wouldn't have made the slightest difference. Rydian could see that Dragonhawk, in that tiny fraction of a second that the boot made contact with the horn, had realized the futility of his attack, and that he immediately regretted invoking his clan's ultimate ability, dooming his people to an eternity of darkness. The strength of his people forever erased in a singular act of heroism. Then the horn tore straight through the boot and up through Dragonhawk's leg, completely crushing his bones and sliding through his inner thigh so that the tip of the horn very unfortunately sliced off the tip of Dragonhawk's penis. And then the Rhino Man ate it. Okay, that's all for now, dudes. Come by another time for the next chapters in our epic story.